Why is it a secret hotel and like all these weird things? It's because if it was an agricultural education center, the crowd that we would get is already a turned on crowd.
This is going to be fun because Rameet and I have shared maybe 5 words with each other. So we're going to get to know each other.
Let's do it.
Okay, so I have this sense, and you can tell me if I'm totally wrong, but I feel like you have a very clear idea of like what you're trying to create in the world, or how you like what you want to build. I'd be curious to hear a little if that's true or not.
I would say it's not true.
Cool.
I've had clear visions and attempted, and some of those attempts I failed. So I can share some of those with you.
I'd love to hear that.
It's actually a story I told Daniel when we first met. So I mentioned in the technology space, I have a consultancy, and after I grew that company to be just over 100 employees, I took a step back from that business and just started to look at what my purpose was and what was our corporate social responsibility. What initiatives were we going to take? And I was like, it'd be really interesting. Let me figure out how to scale impact. There must be a way. Like I could write a check. Or I could do something maybe innovative. Like I have helped companies grow, so why not I help nonprofits grow? So we started a program, and to your point, it was like very clear, super simple. Every 4 months, we're going to take on a nonprofit in the same way that we take on companies, and we're going to help them with innovation and help them with technology. And a lot of their spend that they couldn't raise capital around was around tech, and so we'll just do the work pro bono for you. And so we had a little application process. We took on these nonprofits, and in parallel to this, we had a kind of an investment arm. We had our business was spinning off cash, and we didn't have any investors in the business, and so we would just take that capital and we'd invest it. So I had taken a step back from the business, and I was doing basically 2 things. I was meeting nonprofit founders, and I was meeting for-profit founders. And I was deploying capital into those 2 areas. Well, I was deploying capital into the for-profit companies, and I was choosing who we would take on and work pro bono for the nonprofit companies. And so we did it, and 2 years later, we took a look back, and we helped several nonprofits. We deployed a bunch of capital, and we're like, okay, like how much time would we spend? What projects do we give up to do the work in the pro bono space? And how much impact do we make? Because it'd be great to build the next Charity Water, right? Like if we were there at the beginning and we helped them, that's us scaling impact. We really hacked this thing. I was convinced. As you can tell from my tone, we took a look and we didn't make the impact that we thought we were going to make. We're like, why is that? And conversely, we looked at the portfolio that we had invested, and it was successful. So we clearly was doing something right. We're like selecting founders, deploying capital, and that was working, and that had its own issues in terms of the selection process. And but it was working. So where were we messing up? And so we took a look back and what are we looking for, right? And a founder, we were in a for-profit company founder. We're like, how strong is their vision? How much do they want to go out there and get it? Like what is that? Do we believe staring them in the eye that they can run $100 million plus business? That was the selection criteria. What was their selection criteria for someone running a nonprofit business? Not that. It was how altruistic is your goal? How much impact do you think you can make? It was just that we just didn't know what we were doing in that space, and so we had this totally different bias on who we would support. It's really how big is your heart, right? And so we took a look back, and all these amazing people, lovely people that we supported, very nicely ran their company into the ground, right? And it was this tragic thing to kind of see that happened. Yeah. And so at that point, we had to make a decision. We can either change our selection criteria, right, and kind of pivot the plan, or do something else. And so I promised myself that I was like, I've been successful in running a business and operating a company. And I have a little bit of that capitalistic bone. So maybe I can marry that with impact. And I promised myself my next venture that I started would have impact at the core, as opposed to impact like kind of slapped on top, because that very much was what it was like at the agency. It was really kind of slapped on top, and we wanted to dedicate full resource to it, but then you have a client that's like willing to pay, you kind of start taking away, and it's like you're not supposed to do that, but you do it, And so it's like, how do we integrate it into the core? And so that was the birth of this project. That was my next project. It was like try to be impact at the core.
And so tell us a little bit about that project, but more so I'm curious, like how do you ensure that that impact is integrated in the core?
Yeah, great question. So the question that I had at that point was, I think I'm sure we've all asked, like, which problems do we want to tackle now, right? There's just so many problems that are out there. And so when I looked at the landscape, there was one thing that kept on coming up for me, and it was agriculture. It just seemed like there were a lot of things pointing to that being kind of root cause of several things downstream. Whether it was climate change, whether just like all these topics of health and wellness and chronic illnesses, just like, do we want to spend money earlier on, or do we want to spend money later on in healthcare? So it would seem like the ag industry on some level, and obviously we're all solving amazing problems, and I'm excited to learn about all of them. But ag seemed to always kind of pop up. So then it became a question, okay, cool, how do I attempt to tackle such a wide and broad problem? And I was like, with a problem that large, like, it's unlikely I'd be able to tackle it alone, so there'll be 100 different solutions, and everyone needs to kind of hit it at their own angle. And I was like, all right, let me figure out one angle. I could open up a restaurant, and it'd be like a farm-to-table restaurant, and we somehow could educate people. And I'm like, I don't know if I'd capture enough attention at a farm-to-table restaurant. Like, maybe it's a hotel, and you're there, and it's an eco-hotel, and I'm like, in the city, people are just too busy, and that really won't work. And like, how can I marry this concept? I was like, well, I'll have to have a farm. So what if I do a farm, hotel, event space? You guys get it.
So here we are. Rameet, what did you see in this space originally when you were kind of looking around when you landed here, and what sparked the vision for it?
Yeah, it was very deliberate. I wanted a space that was far enough out of the city that you felt you had to do adventure to it, but close enough that it wasn't a big jump. So I kind of mapped it to going to the Hamptons. And so a certain place in the Hamptons is 2 hours, 2.5, sometimes 3 hours. So how can it be more convenient than that? So it's around an hour and 40 to drive here. Trains an hour and a half, and then a little bit of time on each end. So it was kind of strategic from that side. What is close to a train station that's relatively close to the city, that's in a kind of farming area. You add it all up, and really you have like a half-an-hour strip of the Hudson Valley. Mm-hmm. And so then it became cool. What property can I find that I can legally host and do events like this? And just to give you guys an idea on kind of like the mission of the property and how we're aiming to kind of integrate impact into it. So the idea is to take people. Most of the people that come end up coming from New York, right? Because it's just this convenient trip that you can make. We have all this different type of programming, whether it's wellness or educational, all that stuff. There's one core tenet. There's one thing that we always kind of interject into the programming, and that's some form of farmstead programming, right? And so the normal weekend, this is obviously not a normal weekend, but the normal weekend, someone will come up, we'll have a meal. It's like a welcome dinner, and on the Saturday, which is the programmed weekend day. And then we also do corporate events, so it's like the second day, essentially, of a corporate event. We do a harvest in the field or some type of activity in the field, and a 1-hour discussion on the state of agriculture in terms of where we're at, typically in the US, and maybe we touch on it globally. And the idea there is that through education, we can lead to change. So if we can just explain to consumers what's happening, we can vote correctly with our dollars. Mm-hmm. So that's the core thesis. And why is it a secret hotel and like all these weird things? It's because if it was an agricultural education center, the crowd that we would get is already a turned on crowd. Yeah. What we wanted to get is the crew of people that would follow like a party or something cool or something trendy, and then it's our initiative and our job to make farming cool. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so that's kind of the initiative. Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, just one last thing. So that is the educational and kind of consumer-facing piece. And then we have the farm, and what the farm does is, so everyone is always like, hey, like, you know, I have a restaurant, I heard about the Duchess, we'd love for you to be a purveyor. And I'm like, no. We are trying to get you to buy more from farmers up here. We want to support the farmer. So we actually don't, we're not a purveyor for anyone beyond our own kitchen. We only use 15% by design of what we grow. 80 to 85% of what we grow purposely to give to food banks. And that's how we kind of quote unquote support the local community. And so the idea is, can we build these? Can I scale it? Can I make this successful? Influence a major metropolitan city? Grow this out, maybe do one or two more, like build other kind of interesting ones, host corporate retreats, host, you know, consumer weekends, start to impact from 100,000 to a couple 100,000 people a year, educate them, give them the experience, and then design these to exist outside of other major cities. So we're constantly feeding the population with that knowledge and then supporting the local community around it. So that's the kind of general idea if you want to like paint a picture of what's supposed to be. And this is the beginning. Sorry, pick up.
No, you're great. It's amazing, and I'm curious, like, for us in the room, how can we be stewards of this work for you? Like, what can we take away with us?
Yeah. You know, the topic always comes up. You know, at some point, if you guys want, pull me aside, and I'll give you a little bit of the take on the state of agriculture and like what's going on. I don't think right now is we have the time. And from there, I think at the end of the day, when we're looking at it, is you are voting with your dollars. Everyone has conversations with their friends about what's going on in ag. You guys have all seen the documentaries. Just be conscious about your decision making when you're out in the world.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Rameet, we are so honored to be sharing this place for these 2 weeks, calling it home, getting to experience it. Thank you for that privilege.
Of course, easy.
Yeah.